I'm Scott L. Miller. This is my life living in León, Nicaragua. Today, I'm going to talk about why I think my kids are never going to move away from Nicaragua. I know, a little bit surprising, but I actually was thinking about this today, and I think there is actually a strong number of reasons why they're going to, right now, think that they probably want to move away when they get older. And totally, teenagers always want to move away from their parents when they get older. But I think when my children get old enough to realize how work and lifestyle and options and money and taxes and things start to affect them, they're going to realize that Nicaragua offers them a lot that they had not been thinking about. They only look at the negatives because we absorb the positives in ways that they don't really see, but the negatives impact them every day. So we're going to talk about that today. But first, it is mango season, and I want to show all these mangoes going on in our backyard. So check this out. These are all mangoes all through here. This is just what's dropping off of this one tree we have up here. And this little dog comes out here and grabs the mangoes. So that's why there's half-eaten ones. Now, sometimes it's the lizards eating them. So sorry for the terrible audio as I did that, but I wanted you to see those mangoes. Sometimes the lizards eat them, but most of the time it's the dogs. Now, of course, we try to eat them before they fall on the ground. As I am recording this, it is more or less the official start of Semana Santa. Our housekeeper just went home for the day so she can prepare to go out this evening, and she'll be off for several days as they party all weekend. That's what's going on here. So we're laying low and taking it easy. I have no time to be out at the beach. I'm super busy with work. I've been saying this all week. This has been a really rough work week from a workload perspective, but by the time you are seeing this, I should be packing and getting ready to head off to Laguna de Apoyo, where I will be spending the weekend. I'm trying very hard to squeeze in some videos in between, trying to do loads of work. I'm working very long days, and having done the live stream last night, just a lot going on. So, stepping on something here. So we're going to be out at Laguna de Apoyo, and I really hope I'm able to get a lot of video for you guys. I want to take an opportunity to film somewhere else and just cover a lot of things and show some exciting lifestyle in other parts of the country. We don't get out and do that enough. I don't have a driver's license, but as I said on an earlier video, I believe I now have my tickets to the U.S. to go to get my license. I will be back driving in about a month. And so a million things that people have been waiting to do with me or to see on the show or whatever just has to wait a little bit longer. This has been a year and a half of trying to deal with this because of complications in the United States, nothing here in Nicaragua. And so it's just been, that's one of the struggles of living abroad. Sometimes you have to deal with these things. And this one hit us hard that my license expired, my wife's expired, Paul's expired a couple days ago, but he was able to get his renewed. What a mess it has been. But let's get to today's topic. Having kids and living here in Nicaragua, a lot of people probably assume that my kids would grow up and move on somewhere else as they get older, and my kids believe the same thing. And just real quick, if you have any information that you need to contact me or anything, get in those show notes and check it out. We have a lot of information in there. You can sponsor the show from there. You can contact me, whatever, everything you need to know. And of course, get in those comments and say hello. But my kids have kicked around, and of course kids will do this, and my kids have lived all over the world, so they already have this, oh, the world is just an option kind of feeling. So they kick around lots of different ideas as to where they might want to live when they get older, and they're very set on some places being really attractive, such as the Nordic countries, which of course we love. We spent some time in Norway back in 2015, and we liked it a lot. Beautiful country, wonderful people, lots of really nice stuff, and things that tend to fit my children's lifestyle a lot better than Nicaragua does. While we, as the adults, have a tendency to really like the live music scene. We really like going dancing and so forth. My kids do not. They find that stuff really annoying. Not things they're interested in at all. They really like the quiet lifestyle of the Nordic countries. They really like the cold of the Nordic countries. They like just everything about kind of what life is like there, but they're not aware or not consciously able to understand the impact of decisions such as how difficult the visas are to get there, how hard it is to find work, if they're able to get work visas, if they're able to get visas to go there at all outside of being on vacation. The dog tripped over a bunch of plants there. And of course, they really don't understand the impacts of cost of living. And so I think if they were to be able to move to Norway, they would very quickly understand that the lifestyle that most Norwegians have is not actually that much better, if better at all, than we have here in Nicaragua. And this is a really great example of how extreme the world's wealthiest countries and one of the world's poorest, certainly there are many countries poorer than Nicaragua, but we are on the very poor side of things, how close we actually are in so many ways. The average Nicaraguan has nearly the same capability to go out and just frivolously buy a coffee as the average Norwegian does. the cost of getting a coffee, the cost of basic services in Norway is so high, even though the income levels are so high, that here in Nicaragua, people are able to do a lot of those same things about the same amount of time. In fact, I think you would find that the average Nicaraguan may be able to go out to dinner at a restaurant with higher frequency than Norwegians are able to do. That's not necessarily the case, but it's really close. It's much closer than you realize. Now, of course, what's going to really matter to my children is that the lifestyle that we have here, because of the kind of work we do, the things we're interested in, the way we live, what we're able to do here, even though our income is not that high, we're able to go out to eat every night if that's what we want. We're able to have a private chef, a private cook, a private driver, and all kinds of luxuries they would never be able to have living in some place like Norway. Now, they understand that, and they know that that's a trade-off, and they would have to do things differently. But one of the things that they don't really understand, and I think would impact them a lot, is things like going out to a restaurant or going to a cafe even every day, because we could go to a cafe for breakfast and have coffee and snacks and not worry about what we're ordering ever. They're used to ordering food that they end up not eating. Very common. And then going out to dinner, they're used to being able to go to any restaurant they want and order anything on the menu anytime, including they get things like expensive coffee drinks literally every time we go out. Every time. And if they ever have a time that they're not getting that, which is basically never, they will get a fruit juice or something. And if normally they would get both, definitely more often than they get something alternative. So it's more than once every time. It's really expensive if you're in a place like the US, or especially in a place like Norway. That is a crippling amount of money over time. The normal Norwegians are going to eat at home at least 6 times a week, if not 13 out of every fortnight. Right, that's just going to be normal, and those are not things that I think my children are really mentally prepared to understand what that means, that having to save up to be able to go out to eat as a normal thing, that a beer or a coffee is a treat and not a morning thing. All right, those are completely different lifestyle things. When we talk about the first world and the third world and those kinds of terms here, well, I was just speaking to someone from England, and I was speaking with someone from England and someone from Canada, and we were discussing together how, in so many ways, Nicaragua has surpassed the United Kingdom in being really a first world country. And if you were to really step back and define what should make something a first world country, right, traditional definitions, and I'll do a video on this. I've done some in the past, but I want to really cover this well, especially now that there's been more changes. But if you look traditionally, first world referred to the American sphere of influence, and second world to the Soviet sphere of influence, and third world to the unaligned world. And that's all it was. And over time, especially for marketing reasons, for propaganda reasons, they began to use the term third world to refer to poor countries rather than those that weren't politically aligned, which gave it a negative connotation. But when it started, it was a very positive connotation. We weren't taking sides in a fundamentally immaterial conflict, but instead we were staying neutral and just allowing people to live their lives. So the third world was always the good place. The first world and the second world were just powerful places. Now, there's an attempt to make the third world feel like it is poor, but much of the third world does very well. And what's interesting is taking a poster child of the first world, like the United Kingdom, and a poster child of the third world, like Nicaragua, and comparing them directly, and before we look at individual countries, looking at things that we would generally feel are important for defining what in our minds should be the first and third world, right? So everyone will jump to GDP, of course, and say, well, there should just be a number that we go to. But when you actually look at what GDP is, immediately you can rule that out as a completely meaningless number. It can be gamed, it isn't based on anything, and it doesn't reflect anything useful to real people. So it doesn't have an advantage. A country with a high GDP may be more poor than one with a low GDP and so forth. They typically are not, but they can be. There's no direct connection, and it doesn't have a meaningful connotation in real life. So we throw out GDP because that's a construct of the first world to try to make the first world look better by getting you to ignore all the things you really should ignore. So what should we really look at? And we should make a guide to this, and that's why I'm going to do another video sometime in the future. But some of the things we should think about is how well are the average people able to feed themselves? We have a lot of clouds here, by the way. It's Semana Santa. We're expecting really hot and really bright the whole time, and we have actually kind of cool temperatures, not cool, but definitely not as hot as it could be, and a lot of cloud cover this evening. I'm really shocked. I was not expecting to come outside and find this. It is not that late right now. It's just kind of dark. So the average person, the median, the mean, how well can they feed themselves? How easily can they get a coffee? How easily can they go out to a restaurant? How easily can they get entertainment? Are they able to put food on the table? Are they worried about starvation? That's one really important factor. And of course, all these things are very difficult to pin down with exact comparisons, but we understand the concept. One of the most important things is sustenance. Another is shelter. How easily are people able to find shelter and stay warm or cool or whatever is needed so that they are not in a life-threatening situation, right? If you're going to freeze to death, that would be bad. If you're not able to get shelter away from a hurricane, that would be bad, and so forth. So are you able to get shelter? Very important, of course, is there health care, right? What is the quality and the accessibility of health care? If you are in that poor category, do you have food and health care and shelter and so forth? Now, of course, the rich in any country have all those things all the time. There's really no place where you don't have those things when you're rich. So when we compare how many people as a percentage of the population fall into the very poor category and how those people are treated between many of the major countries of the world, what we end up discovering quite often is that many of the countries we typically associate with being super rich and being super first world don't actually stack up very well against many of the countries from the third world. And using the UK to Nicaragua comparison, Nicaraguans are more likely to have shelter, more likely to be able to have basic nutritious food, although that one's awfully close, and way easier access and way cheaper access to healthcare in a more meaningful way. So when we're looking at those metrics, the things that we feel are most important for survival and human care, Nicaragua, as an example, seems to clearly beat the United Kingdom, because it's every category. Nicaragua's ahead. It seems to beat Canada because still, the same categories, there are some that Canada does better than the UK, and it's closer to Nicaragua. But if you come down to a pure checkbox, do they offer, a baseline of each of these things? No. When it at least comes to healthcare, they do not. And do they exceed in the other areas? Maybe not. Right? Now, the U.S. gets a little bit closer, but it's still pretty difficult to say that the U.S. is ahead. It feels very much behind. And having moved from the U.S. to here, I can tell you, for every person I've ever met, the U.S. is quite significantly behind Nicaragua. So where you draw a line, what is the third world and what is the first world when it comes to development is a little bit difficult to say. But what's easy to say is that many of the times that we think of a country as being the prototypical first world country, it often struggles to actually justify being put in that category. And places that are often the prototypical third world countries maybe shouldn't be considered first world, but certainly aren't behind the places we often use as examples of the first world. Now, it's true, living in Europe, there's many places that I've lived that I would say, yes, they do have a lot of development, a lot of things better than any of the ones that I talked about. They're ahead of Nicaragua in many areas. They're ahead of the U.S. in many areas. They're way ahead of Canada and way ahead of the U.K. in many areas. Places like Switzerland or Romania, where they just have, better safety, better healthcare, fewer people below the super poverty line and so forth. Some of those areas are doing extremely well in that way. Now, it's hard if you're coming from one of the traditional first world nations, to really grasp doing well, because we're taught that doing well is always an economic indicator. But to real people, economics don't matter. They may eventually matter. They may be an underlying component that leads to other things, and that's completely valid. We understand that. But for real people on the ground, it is a proxy. It is not a goal. If you say to a real person and actually make them stop and think about what they care about, and you said, is your goal to have good, healthy food on the table, shelter over your head, know that you're able to get health care and it's not something you have to be afraid of in your life, and then you actually have time and freedom to go out and do things you enjoy, whether it's listening to music or painting or reading a book or going for a hike or whatever, they would say those things matter. And you say, okay, and how much does it matter the economics of your country? Right? If these things are taken care of, how much do you care that the government reports success economically? They'd probably say, I don't really care at all. Or maybe they'd say, I care a little bit because I want to live in a country that's bragging about that. Okay, that's fine. It can be a positive. But as a goal, as an actual, this is what matters versus having enough to eat, very few people, especially those who actually worry about having enough to eat, are going to report that this arbitrary number that they report to other places matters much at all, if at all. So that's important, right? Really important. And when my kids are looking at moving around the world, A lot of these things are going to come into play, that they're going to realize that by living in Nicaragua, there's a lot of things that they have gotten in life and have access to in life that makes life much more relaxed, much more enjoyable, much less stressful. And these things matter. You know, if you grew up in the United States like I did, we're used to this ball of stress and difficult, and knowing that we're going to get in the rat race. We know we have to work 60 hours a week every week for the rest of our lives. We know that our retirement is precarious at best. We live with that. And we're taught that the whole world is worse than where we are. And so we have this, like, this is just what we're going to put up with, and everything else is scary feeling. But my kids grew up abroad. They've been exposed to lots of different things. And so when they go out and on their own start making those decisions for themselves, I think they're going to very quickly say, wait, I grew up without this stress. I grew up without these worries. I grew up without these concerns. I grew up with this incredible flexibility and power. Why would I move to a place where that goes away? Maybe I gain something. I like the colder weather. I like lutefisk. I like whatever. I just love the view of fjords. Of course you do. It's beautiful. Norway's a great place. Not disparaging Norway. I love Norway, but I don't want to pay to live there. If I could live in Norway with all the freedoms and flexible visas and low cost of living that I have here in Nicaragua, I'd still be hard-pressed to move to Norway, but I would be a lot closer. I love it there. It is a great country, but it is way too cold for me. I don't want to put up with any of that, except on a brief vacation. But it is a great country that if that was the only thing, I certainly could live there and be very happy. But the cost of living and all those things is so difficult, and that affects everyday life. Now, in Norway, I don't think you have very many people at that starvation level. So Norway does really well on those kinds of charts. But to do so, it does so by being one of the, if not the richest per capita country in the world. And this is important. Places like Nicaragua, all of their economic development is coming from the people working. But in places like Norway, the majority of their economic output comes from harvesting things off their shore, both fish and oil. And they have a massive, massive economy for a very small population coming completely from the consummation of natural resources. Those are things that will run out someday, but also are unfair in many ways. When we say the system works or they're able to do these things, yes, they're able to do them, but not because they have the answers, because they have a panacea that just funnels money into the country ad nauseum, and they can always depend on there just being trillions of more dollars flowing into the country, quite nearly literally, in a way that places like Nicaragua cannot. And maybe Nicaragua at some point discovers, right, a giant platinum mine and is able to just ship platinum all over the world, and they don't have to worry about money ever again, and no one has to work or anything. And then we have skyrocketing interest rates, and everything just goes crazy, and we have inflation, and it's nuts because we have this huge amount of sudden money in the system. That could happen, but the reality is it's not really how things work. But living here now, we have some of the best economic growth in the region, and we feel those things, and it feels really positive. Now, that is not to say that my kids will not experiment with living in other countries. I think that they probably will, and I think there may be some that they really want to. But Guatemala is a really hot one for them. I think it meets a lot of their needs. They want cooler temperatures than Nicaragua, which I do understand. It is the one thing for me that I feel we put up with in Nicaragua is that it is just a lot warmer. Well, two things. It is a lot warmer than where we would like to be. That I wish we could just turn down the temperature on that. And the other is we really enjoy, especially me and my kids though, quite a bit, really large urban cities. And Managua is getting better in that way, better for the way that we like it, quite noticeably year to year. And by the time my kids are old enough to be making those decisions, I think that Managua may have come along far enough that they won't see the huge benefits in moving farther away. But places like Guatemala City or San Salvador do offer things that we don't have here in Nicaragua, and I can totally see that being something that they're willing to move away for, especially if it's not that far away. But beyond those factors, I think that they're going to go look at the world, experiment with some places, find places that they really love, just like we did, Spain and Greece. We had some places that were so close to perfect, but they were challenging. They still had cost of living issues. They still had visa issues. They still had just complexities of life that are very hard to justify in many cases. And because my kids have been so blessed with how easy it is and have their default access to the world is so flexible and positive. It's, because they have safety. They have incredible women's protections, right? I only have daughters. So that women's rights are so far ahead here, very much in line with the Nordic countries. Those are things that they're going to really notice giving up. Again, if they'd grown up in the U.S., then so much of the world is a positive move from there that it's easy to be like, I could move anywhere. But when you've spent many years of your life living with the advantages that we have here to then look at moving other places. You really notice what you're giving up, and it's something that you feel. And so it's something that I think about a lot, and I talk to my kids about a lot, and they certainly have some feelings like they want to move to some other countries, and I totally understand that. And when I was a kid living in New York, I always thought I was going to want to move to California. How clueless was I? That was absolutely the last place that I would want to go. I do love the Pacific, but I do not like living in California. I've worked there briefly. It was horrendous. I like New York so much better. If I had to live in the United States full-time, yeah, I like the South because I don't like the snow. But if I was going to be around snow, places like Pittsburgh and Buffalo, they're Ithaca, they really are what I like. So my thoughts when I was younger really didn't have a good view of where I was going to end up when I was older. And then I ended up not living in the U.S. at all. I would never have guessed Central America when I was in high school. So maybe they'll end up just about anywhere. The world is open to them, hopefully still by the time they're making those decisions. But my feeling, and we'll be able to go back and watch this video, so I'm putting this out there knowing that they're going to call my bluff on this at some point, but my guess is that they will experiment a little bit, but ultimately they're going to come back to Nicaragua because it just offers so much. And unless those things dramatically change, I think they're going to say this is the place that just gives me the best lifestyle, the everyday. And then, yeah, I can visit other places and get that urbane environment when we want or whatever. And we're really hoping that a train is put in between Leon here and Managua, where they likely are going to want to live, because they don't really like the beach like we do. And so if there was a train that ran between the two and we could visit each other any day just that easy without even getting on a bus and just riding a train through the country, then they will just live near a terminal. I will live near a terminal, and life will be very easy from that perspective. So that is my prediction. I know people wonder, like, what are we doing with our kids? Where are they going? What do they want to do? And I think that Nicaragua really does offer, and this is something we think about, right? It's not just that Nicaragua is right for us. We think that Nicaragua is probably the best option for our children as they get older, as this is where we think they're going to want to really make their long-term home. And sure, they're like us. They have wanderlust. They want to see the world. They want to live lots of different places and experiment, but they also want to be close to us. So obviously that's a factor that would drive them here. But they have kind of a built-in high quality of life here that's going to be very difficult to move away from. Same for us, right? Would we consider going somewhere else? Oh, there's lots of places I'd like to live, but boy, it's hard to give up all the advantages and comforts of living in Nicaragua. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. You can also go and check out the GoFundMe in the show notes to help support Marcela in her fight against stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. She is, at this point, seems like she's doing well, but it's a long time before we get really good feedback and know exactly how all the different moving parts are progressing. So hopefully everything is good there. As always, share on social media, tell someone about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.